Hello, everyone. We're going to get this started, even though it's a little late. We wanted stragglers to get a chance to come in here. I'm Patrick Burtz. Many of you know me. I'm a city administrator for Maumee, and for years I've followed this movement, the Strong Town movement. It's sometimes like I have a philosophy. It's very similar, and it's almost like I'm a minister who makes up what I want to say and then finds somewhere in the Bible where it says it. So. So that's kind of what I did, right? I came to Maumee, I did this in other communities, these kind of road diets, and just the philosophy of economics that surrounds what the Strong Towns movement is about, building towns from the ground up. But actually, we reached out originally when we did our projects, and we bought a lot of books and gave them to council members and the community members as a community education effort to give people a sense of what we were trying to do, not just in the uptown, but rebuilding the community altogether in terms of infrastructure and economics, things that are affecting our communities that sometimes we are lulled to sleep and not believing they're happening, and we wake up one day and realize we wonder why we got here. So anyway, it culminated in the project, and we were able to get Charles Marohn, known as Chuck, here on my left, to friends and colleagues, is a founder or the president of Strong Towns. This is hard because I know a lot about him already, but I'm going to read this anyway. He is now retired professional engineer and land use planner with decades of experience. He holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and a master's in urban and regional planning, both from the University of Minnesota, where he lives, which I believe his child is starting there as well. Yeah. He and his wife graduated from there. So Marohn is the author of Strong Towns, a bottom-up revolution to rebuild American prosperity, which is the first book I gave out. And The Confessions of a Recovery Engineer, which is particularly interesting in terms of what we're going through in Maumee right now. He hosts the Strong Towns podcast. If anybody hasn't seen that, you really ought to go online and look this up because there's some really interesting stuff there. And he's not the only speaker, but his organization is large enough to have other speakers, and they give you examples from other communities, too. And he's a primary writer of Strong Towns, web content. He has presented Strong Town concepts to hundreds of cities and towns across North America. Planetsen.
I think they're called Planetizen. But
Planetizen
I don't really know.
Is what it is, yeah. Named him one of 10 most influential urbanists of all time. I would totally agree with it. I would absolutely agree with that. I've been doing this for 37 years now. Please join me in welcoming Charles Marohn.
Hey, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's very nice to be here. I've had some delightful trips to Ohio, and it is nice to be back. I was in Washington, D.C. yesterday, and I'm definitely more of a Midwest guy in many ways. This feels much more like my kind of place. I appreciate the shout out to the University of Minnesota. My daughter, I have two daughters. One's a senior in high school, and those of you that have kids that have graduated know that there's, this handoff moment where you're like, all right, this is your life. Like, you get to make major decisions about your life now. And she, in the last couple weeks, 3 weeks ago, decided she was going to go to the University of Minnesota, which I can say that here. I'm a graduate of the University of Minnesota. My wife is as well. We live in Minnesota, and I can say that here because no one in this room fears the Gophers in any way, in any regard on anything, which I'm happy to be the ambassador for the friendly Golden Gophers. We have all kinds of Ohio and Michigan institutions that strike fear into us, but it's not reciprocated very often, right? Thank you for the invitation to be here. We're going to talk a lot about transportation tonight, and I'm going to start by saying I've got to spend a little bit of time in your core downtown here, and get a little bit of the background and understanding of the things that you've been working on and working to do. And I just am maybe going to start with a statement of gratitude. This work is very hard. It's very difficult. I get to come into town and talk and share ideas. You are the ones out here making things happen. There's been a lot of progress here, been a lot of really good things that have happened here. Obviously, there's a lot more work to do, and I just want to take a moment at the top here and applaud you, because that first bit of movement, that first bit of change is always the hardest. And hopefully tonight we can help kind of accelerate some of this. Everybody in this room remembers this, right? March of 2020, that very strange feeling we all had, where the world kind of was just different one day. I don't know if you had an opportunity to take a walk or to go out into this, but it was very eerie. I remember in my little hometown just walking around and there were no cars anywhere. And I had never experienced that. Like that, my life had always had cars omnipresent. The thing about this shift caused by COVID was just the dramatic change, right? This is a graph, and I apologize. I'm an engineer. I like graphs. There won't be that many in this presentation, but this is one. You don't have to read like everything on here, but what I'm trying to show, vehicle miles traveled before and after recessions. And so this kind of shows that when we get to economic recession, vehicle travel goes down a little bit. Here's COVID, right? And the takeaway from this graph is that COVID was unprecedented. The level of drop-off of traffic was unprecedented in COVID. When we think about transportation systems in the United States, one of the kind of core tenets of civil engineering is that traffic fatalities are directly related or correlated to the amount people drive. When you see traffic fatalities reported, they're often reported in terms of vehicle miles traveled. So we might actually have more people die in a given year, but if that number of deaths per mile traveled is going down, we look at that internally as a success. The theory or the beliefs of the profession would suggest that when traffic drops so dramatically, we should also see a corresponding drop in the number of fatalities. If very few people are out driving, very few people are going to die, right? You with me? That's not what happened. What happened, in fact, was the exact opposite. There were fewer people out driving, not just fewer, dramatically fewer people out driving, but traffic deaths actually went up. They actually went in the other direction. How do we explain this? It's interesting because as a civil engineer, as someone who has worked in the traffic engineering profession, this is one of those moments that should cause catharsis, right? A deep level of introspection. Everything that we believe about traffic safety is based on this kind of volume of traffic. Traffic volume goes down, traffic fatalities go up. Something is broken in our theory. Something is not working, right? Obviously, that thing is the driver. Can't possibly be anything about what we have done or what we've designed. It has to be that drivers have become more pathological. And in fact, if you go through and you look from the Federal Department of Highway Safety all the way down to universities and other places that have studied this phenomenon, they've all come to the same basic conclusion. Drivers are really broken. They become more reckless. They become more pathological. We have just become worse people since the pandemic started. That is a conclusion of our traffic safety officials. Let me give you a little bit. I keep pointing this way as if that's going to do something. Let me give you a little rundown. These are headlines from newspapers talking about this phenomena. 2020 fatality data shows increased traffic fatalities during the pandemic. And then look at this subheading: risky driving behaviors, including failure to wear a seatbelt, speeding, drinking while driving, are contributing factors. All of a sudden, the pandemic happened and we started to drive really fast. We started to drive without seatbelts. We started to drink and drive and do drugs and all this. Pedestrian deaths spike as we have a surge in reckless driving. Fatalities are climbing to record levels. Authorities cite drivers' anxiety levels, larger vehicles, and fraying social norms. We are more anxious now. We have fewer social taboos about driving, so we're driving around like maniacs, running into each other. It's not your imagination. Drivers have gotten more reckless. So, you all believe that drivers have gotten more reckless? Yep, they have been. Absolutely. Here's why. Crash tests have surged. Here's why. And this particular article was in the LA Times, has this great quote that sums up. Reckless driving is, quote, a sign of the overall lack of consideration we're showing for others, whether it be wearing masks, not getting vaccinated, or how we drive. It's very aggressive. It's very selfish. I detest this narrative for many, many reasons. But let me give you one human reason, besides the fact that it's wrong. Let me give you one human reason. I feel like our public safety officials have let us down for a long time. And this feels like the worst letdown. Because the letdown here is not an abrogation of their responsibilities. It's not a failure to be introspective. All those things are tied into this. But what this one is actually saying, don't look at us, look at each other. See the person next to you, they're the problem. See the person up the street, they're the issue. They're pathological, they're broken, they're a terrible person. Hate on them. This bothers me really deeply because it says, in a sense, there's nothing we can do from a traffic safety standpoint because Americans, humans in this country, are sick and degenerate people. And I just don't believe that. Let me show you a different set of reasonings and understandings. Because I think there's a very simple explanation for what has gone on. And it's an explanation that reveals some deeper truths about our system. Again, apologize to those of you that don't like charts. These are some very simple charts. I'll walk you through them. Don't overstress yourself. This is a chart of deaths per billion miles traveled. So how many people are dying on our roadways? And this is a graph right here in blue of vehicle miles traveled. So what you see here in a big picture sense is that we're driving a lot more than we used to. And the amount of people who die per mile we travel has gone way down. Traffic engineers, public safety officials would describe this as a very happy outcome of the great work that they have done, right? They have created safer streets. We've required seat belts. We've improved automobiles. We now have more padding and more crash systems. We've done all this stuff to make things safer. And as a result, you get this really happy chart where we drive more and more, but the amount of people who are dying goes down. Now, note that the number of people who actually die has not really decreased overall, but the amount per mile traveled has gone down, okay? I want to show you another chart now. This is a chart of congestion. So average annual per commuter traffic delays over time. This is how much time people spend stuck in traffic. Okay, so we used to spend less time stuck in traffic. Now we spend a lot more time stuck in traffic. You all with me? All right, let's put these two charts together. What do you notice? We're driving a lot more and spending a lot more time stuck in traffic. What happened during the pandemic? Was anybody stuck in traffic? No, right? Okay, here's this huge leap that the public safety officials and traffic engineers have a hard time making. When you are stuck in traffic, it's really hard to kill somebody in your car. When you are going 0 miles an hour or near 0 miles an hour or in stop and go traffic or are sitting at a traffic signal or what have you, the death rate is really low. It's really low. What happened during COVID? We got rid of all that congestion and people were able to drive the speed that the roadways were engineered to handle, which is very fast. And so what they did is they drove very fast. In such an environment, even a low number of cars, a low amount of traffic creates a very dangerous situation. If we go back before COVID and we look at the time of day when most of our fatalities happen, what time of day do most of them happen? after 7 o'clock in the evening till like 1 in the morning. Why? Because there's no congestion then, right? There's no artificial slowing down of the traffic. People are free to drive the speed that the roadway, the street, is engineered for. And so people tend to drive faster, and when they drive faster, more crashes happen, especially fatal crashes. To me, this is not a very hard thing. And there are people now who have started to talk about this phenomenon, start to recognize that the engineering of our streets actually communicates things to drivers, communicates things that we don't want to have communicated. That it isn't that we are broken as human beings. I mean, we can go around the world and we can look at other cultures that have experienced similar phenomena, but do not have the death rates that we have had. The reason being, we have a very unique way of engineering transportation in this country. I want to take the next little bit and break that down for you. And I want to kind of help you see the world around you a little bit differently. Because if we're going to build places that are safe, if we're going to build places that are going to function very well for us, we have to understand what we have already built. And that starts with this. This is like a kid's drawing almost of the hierarchical road network. What this is describing is this system that we all experience and that we all probably don't even bother to think about. It's just the way we build things, right? Local roads go into collector roads go into arterial roads go into major arterial roads, major arterials go into interstates. This is the network that we have built essentially all of post-war America on. This idea that little streets flow into bigger streets, flow into bigger streets. I want you to think of a watershed. Everyone in this room knows how a watershed works, right? Little brooks and streams flow into rivers. The rivers kind of come together into larger rivers. They come together into major tributaries. Again, little to big. Everyone in this room recognizes that if we get rain out on the periphery of a system like this, if that rain is intense enough or persistent enough over a long enough period of time, all of that water will come together and create a flood. As a civil engineer, I had to take Hydrology 101. We spent about 5 minutes on this in Hydrology 101 because it's such an obvious concept that everybody understands. But somehow, when civil engineers finish Hydrology 101 and walk across the hall into Traffic 101, this concept becomes really nebulous and confusing to us. And we somehow don't grasp or understand that when we have a little bit of stuff going on out on the periphery, that it all comes together and creates a flood. If we set out to engineer a system that created the maximum amount of traffic congestion, this is what it would look like. If that was our goal, we want to take in every size city and make the maximum amount of delay and congestion and frustration possible, what we would do is we would create a system that funneled everybody into the same place at the same time every day. That is what we have done. We literally have created the flood. We have built a machine that generates a flood of traffic every day. And this is why congestion is a ubiquitous experience across North America. Every city, no matter the size, experiences stifling levels of congestion during the day. If you are in Toledo, congestion. If you are in Detroit, congestion. If you are in Maumee, congestion. If you are in the tiny little town of Brainerd, Minnesota, where I live, we can go out to the main street light at 7:50 in the morning. There'll be cars backed way up. We can talk to all the people sitting there in traffic and say, what do you think of the traffic here? And they'll say, oh, it's just horrible. It's terrible. We need another lane. We need to do something to make traffic flow better. And then 20 minutes later, there won't be a car in sight, right? This is a common American experience. Because of this ubiquitous experience, engineers tend to overbuild, over-design, over-engineer all of our transportation infrastructure. I want you to think about this for a second. If you are an engineer designing a roadway, and you are projecting out a certain amount of traffic, you know in your mind that if there is slightly more traffic than what you have built or what you have designed for, the entire thing is going to come to a halt, right? But if you build way more capacity than you need, if there's less capacity, then the experience of the driver is just free open road. No congestion, no heartbreak, no headache, nothing. There's a huge asymmetry there, right? Under-designed by a little bit, total system failure. Over-designed by a lot, and everybody gets a positive experience. There's a huge incentive for us to build way, way more than we actually need. If you become cognizant of this and start to look, you will see that 95% of the day, every road is congestion-free. There's only a tiny bit of time where a few places have congestion in our systems. That's not a system that is efficient. That's not a system that is optimized in any way. A lot of this design criteria descend from this notion of forgiving design. And again, forgiving design is so deeply embedded in our system today that we just call it design now. I turned 50 this month. I'm far enough separated now from college where when I talk to young engineers and I ask them, have you heard of forgiving design? They said, no, they've not. I think the term forgiving design was kind of phasing out. The professors that I had were still teaching it, and now today it's just design. I think the teachers that I had, the professors that I had taught it as forgiving design because of the huge insight that their generation had made that literally saved millions of lives, right? Millions and millions of lives. They recognized something very important. They recognized that human beings will drive the speed they feel comfortable driving. That when you design a roadway, it in a sense signals to people a level of safety. And people will drive the speed that they feel comfortable driving. And so if we are going to build roads to be safe, what we have to do is we have to look at drivers and anticipate and understand the common mistakes that they make and design the road to compensate for those mistakes. Design the roadway so that it will forgive the driver who makes the common normal human mistake. Let me show you what this looks like. Here's a 2-lane road through the woods. Very simple. We recognize that on a 2-lane road, sometimes a driver is going to float a little bit in their lane. Maybe they look down to change the radio station. Maybe the kid is crying in the back seat and they get distracted. They're going to float a little bit. What we don't want is we don't want them to float across the center lane and hit the oncoming vehicle. So what do we do to forgive that particular mistake? We widen out the lanes. We give them a little bit more room to move. Now we know that drivers sometimes go off the roadway. Maybe there's an obstacle in the road. Maybe they've drifted off to sleep, failed to pay attention. Again, maybe the kid is crying in the back. Whatever it is, we've all experienced this as drivers where we actually leave the driving lane for whatever reason. We don't want that to be a fatal mistake, right? We don't want them to go over the lip of the road, get pulled off into the ditch and what have you. So what do? We create a little bit of recovery area on the edge of the road, and we give drivers a little bit of extra room for that unforeseen thing that might happen. We recognize as engineers that a driver in a vehicle is going to have a lot of kinetic energy stored up as they're moving very, very quickly. We want that kinetic energy to dissipate before they run into something if they go off the road completely. And so what we do is we go in and we say, let's remove those obstacles on the side so that if they go off the road, they're not going to hit something before they can come to a stop. This is called a forgiving design. And let me just be very clear. This approach has saved millions of lives, millions of lives. I showed you that one chart that said deaths per 1,000 miles traveled or a million miles, I can't even remember what it was, trillion miles traveled, whatever. It just went down like that. If we had the same death rate today that we had in 1935, and people drove as much as they did today, instead of having 42,000 people die on our roadways last year, it would be over 500,000. That's how much forgiving design has saved. This is a genius set of insights, and it's why my professors were very proud of it. What is wrong with forgiving design? Forgiving design works fantastic on our roadways. Between cities, between places, this is a genius way to build things. But when we bring this idea into our cities, when we bring this into our complex urban environments, when we bring this into places where there are cars driving through, but also vehicles stopping, vehicles turning, vehicles pulling into traffic, out of traffic, where we have people walking, people on bikes, people in wheelchairs, people randomly crossing, the kid running out into the street after the kickball, the dog that got loose. When we bring forgiving design into our urban areas, where we have all this complexity, we are signaling the wrong things to drivers. What we signal to driver with this design is, we've got your back. We've designed this to forgive your mistakes. And drivers perceive that, and what do they do in response? They speed up. Yeah, they drive faster. They recognize that the level of danger for them is far less, and they tend to speed up and drive faster, making this problem much worse. The Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices is kind of a national, in fact, international guidebook for how to build urban streets, for how to build roadways as well. Engineers sometimes call this one of their Bibles in terms of design. When we go to this Bible and we ask it, what is the difference between, say, a highway between here and Detroit, or the urban street out in front of our nice downtown, the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices actually says the definition of a street is see highway. It's the same thing. There's no discernible difference. That's absurd, right? Like, everybody in this room understands that that's absurd. There's a huge difference between a street and a highway. But in terms of the design manuals that we use to create them, there is no discernment between the two. What this does is this creates this situation that we've all experienced, where we have a road designed for 55 mile an hour speed. We have it marked to be somewhere around 25 miles an hour, and people actually drive somewhere around 40 or 45, right? We've all been in these environments repeatedly. I was on one of these environments on the way in here today, right? I always debate whether to put this in, and then I've been keeping it in lately. It feels like piling on, but I also feel like it's very important. I'm trying to show you here the mentality that goes into the standard orthodoxy of how we build our streets. And I want you to be, ultimately, at the end of the day, confident pushing back on that orthodoxy. This is another exhibit. This is a traffic signal. This is a little pole that the traffic signal's on. So up at the top of this, the pole goes out over the street with your red, yellow, and green lights on it. You'll see at the bottom of this pole, there's a little bit of separation between the concrete base and the metal pole here, right? And let me show you from the side what this looks like. There's a gap right here. The reason for that gap is because there are shear pins in that little part here. There's a shear pin, set of shear pins that separate this pole from this concrete base. And the reason why there's shear pins is because the standard for design in an environment like this, where vehicles are known to go off the road at very high speeds with lots of kinetic energy, is to have a pole that will absorb that energy and, in a sense, break away, as opposed to being a hard, fixed object. Because if the driver hits it and it doesn't move, the driver and anyone in the car will experience deep trauma. And so what we have done is we've said, we're going to engineer this so that the pole breaks away and absorbs all that kinetic energy, and it's not transferred to the driver and any passengers at such an intense level. You'll notice right here a little stand with a little button on it. That's where the person is supposed to be standing, waiting to cross the street. In the area where we know vehicles go off the roadway with such violence, such ferocity, that we have gone through the extra expense and the extra effort of making the poles break away. Next time you are out standing at a signal waiting to cross, look at the pole. You will likely see a breakaway note there. And understand what this is. This is the designer being very, very sensitive to the trauma and the injury potentially of the driver and any passengers within the vehicle. But being, in a sense, blind to or insensitive to or dispassionate about the potential trauma to the person that they have positioned in this exact same spot. There is a fantastic book by a man named Daniel Kahneman. It's called Thinking, Fast and Slow. And it describes human psychology in a way that is going to astound you. I read this book. Before I read this book, I thought I was a very smart, rational, thoughtful person who makes smart, rational, and thoughtful decisions. When I finished this book, I realized that I am merely a slightly evolved chimpanzee. Kahneman shows in page after page after page, and this is a series of experiments that him and his colleague Amos Tversky did over multiple decades, where they looked at basically human fallacies. If you've heard anything about the study of behavioral economics, it really descends from the work that Kahneman and Tversky did. This stuff is genius. One of the things that they recognize is that the human brain has two ways of thinking, two ways of processing information. They call them System 1 and System 2. System 1 is the very fast way of processing information. It's kind of the passive way. I'm not talking about your heart beating automatically or your lungs. Those are involuntary systems. I'm talking about your systems of thinking and reasoning. Almost everything we do falls in System 1. If I ask you, what is 2 plus 2, everybody in this room can say 4. You don't have to think about it very deeply. It just comes to you automatically. But if I ask you to add up 2 4-digit numbers, there's some freak in this room that could probably do that like this. But most of us, especially if we didn't have pencil and paper, but even if we did, it would be a much more complicated problem. We would have to move everything else out of our brain, and we would have to focus on those numbers, carry the 1, do this, that. It would be an all-consuming thing for a short period of time. That is System 2. System 2 is the deep thinking, focused concentration. Here's the thing about System 2. It's very painful. We don't like to do it very often. I mentioned at the top that I have 2 daughters. They both are finishing up their advanced placement tests in school. My one daughter this week had her AP World History test, a 4-hour exam. This is a kid who does competitive dance. So we'll do on some days 4 hours of dance. And I pick her up from 4 hours of dance, and she's, in a good mood. She's ready to go. I pick her up from a 4-hour test where she literally sat at a desk and did not move and just used her brain. And she is absolutely wiped out and exhausted. Why? Why is it more exhausting than 4 hours of aerobic activity? Because System 2 is really hard. It's very, very painful. It's hard to do, especially over extended periods of time. Why am I telling you this? It is an uncomfortable truth, and it's a truth that a lot of safety officials, a lot of designers, and also a lot of safety advocates don't like to acknowledge. But we have to acknowledge it because it is true. Driving is a System 1 activity. A lot of us would like it to be a System 2 activity, and I'll talk about the advocates for a little bit. There's a certain strain of thinking in safety advocacy that once you get behind a wheel, you are in charge of a 2-ton death machine, and you are responsible to, at all times, be hyper-vigilant, to live in System 2. This is impossible. The only people who are capable of doing this are race car drivers and jet fighter pilots. Mere mortals do not function in this way. We function in System 1. We drive in System 1. And we have to drive in System 1 because otherwise people couldn't do it. How many of you feel comfortable when you're driving listening to the radio? Everybody, right? How many of you feel comfortable when you're driving singing along to a song? How many of you feel comfortable talking to someone in the passenger seat? Right? The reason you feel comfortable doing that is because driving is a System 1 activity. It doesn't require you to crowd everything else out of your brain in order to do it. It's not like adding up 2 4-digit numbers, right? This is why when you come across someone who's talking on a phone, holding it up to their hand, and they're doing this and they drive real slow, it's because they're in System 2 here, and they don't have enough brain power to do the rest. So what does the human do when we get in that situation? We slow down, because then we can process in System 1, right? Driving is a System 1 activity, and it has to be at all times. This makes these campaigns that we do to try to shame drivers into driving different insulting, ineffective. Let me say this. People will drive the speed they feel comfortable driving regardless of any other factor. Because driving is a System 1 activity, we can put up signs, we can put out a press release, say there's going to be a lot of cops out this weekend. We can do all kinds of stuff. People do not get in their car and sit there and ponder this. They get in their car and they drive the speed they feel comfortable driving, because driving is a System 1 activity. It's funny because these campaigns where we run ads in magazines and online to tell people, be safe, drive smart. We had a Vision Zero campaign in my city where the local sheriff's office got a bunch of money from the state to promote safe driving. And one of the things they did is went to the high school football game, and they bought one of those guns where you shoot the t-shirts up in the crowd. And they bought t-shirts that said drive safe, drive sober, or whatever. And they shot those out into the crowd, and they blew, a couple $1,000s doing that. These things are wildly ineffective in terms of changing driver behavior. It's as if you, went to your restroom at work, and there was a sign on the wall that said, reduce heart disease and diabetes by eating less sugar. And then you walk back to the break room and there's a big stack of donuts and cookies, right? One of them appeals to your brain, System 2. The other one appeals to your gut, System 1. System 1 is way more powerful. And if we don't deal with System 1, we don't deal with anything. These things really insult me. And they insult me because, I'm sorry, let me say this a different way. These things are very insulting. They aggravate me. They insult you. They insult you because they pretend that somehow by sharing messages like this, and then this is the one that makes me really, really angry, by somehow shaming you, that your behavior on roads that are designed to drive fast on will be affected. When the public safety officials, engineers, and others know that that is just not the case. If we want people to drive slower, we actually have to do things differently. Let me walk you through what different would look like. The standard engineering approach to speeding looks like this. We go out and conduct a speed study, and we ask ourselves a question: are people in this area speeding? If the answer to that question is yes, the standard engineering approach is to do what? Raise the speed limit. It drives people crazy. I worked a couple summers years ago as an intern for the Department of Transportation in Minnesota. And we would have these mayors from cities, people who cared about their community, cared about the people in the place, would call up and complain, you built a highway through the middle of my city, people are driving way too fast. And they would say, all right, we'll come out and do a speed study. And we would go out, and they'd send me, the little intern, out. I'd sit there on the side of the road with a radar gun. I would write down the speeds people were driving. I'd come back to the office, and I'd say, yep, people are driving really, really fast. And so what we would do is we would go back to the mayor, and we would say, yep, we're going to raise the speed limit by 10 miles an hour. And the mayor would flip out. Why would we do that? It's not because the DOT is pathological. It's not because they don't care. It's because they're fine-tuned to a different set of metrics. Why is that the correct response? On a roadway. It's a correct response because the most dangerous thing on a road, when you're traveling at high speeds over distance, the most dangerous thing is not speed, it's differences in speed. If everybody's driving 90 miles an hour in the same direction, it's really, really safe. If you have one person driving 60 and one person driving 40, it is ridiculously dangerous. Ridiculously dangerous. And so the goal of traffic engineering is to get traffic to flow, to get everybody to drive at a similar speed. And so the proper response on a roadway when you have people speeding is to say, we've done something wrong here, the speed limit needs to go up. This is not the proper response on our streets, however. And when we go out and we say, you know, out in front of the theater here tonight, people are speeding, what do? Well, we go out and conduct a speed study. Is there speeding? If the answer is yes, then there's only one response that works. We actually need to change the design of the street. We are actually signaling with our design something incorrect. Our design right now today is signaling to people, drive fast, when we need them to drive much slower. And so we have to change the design. And once we change the design, we go up and do a speed study. And we do this process again and again and again until we get it right. Until people are driving at a speed that is actually safe for the conditions. We have a saying at Strong Towns, if you need a sign to tell people to slow down, you designed your street wrong. We actually have to communicate to drivers who are driving in System 1, who are not pathological people, who are not broken, who are not evil, who have not gone crazy with anxiety because of the pandemic. We need to communicate to drivers who are very human what the proper speed is through our design. We can do this. This is not a hard thing to do. If you go to engineering manuals, they will often have charts like this. It's a chart that lays out the trade-off between mobility and access, or you can think of this in real human terms as the ability to get somewhere and the ability to be somewhere. Mobility and access. And what a chart like this will say is that there's a really nice trade-off here. If you're on an arterial road, remember our hierarchical road network? If you're on an arterial road, you can have lots of mobility. You can get all kinds of places. If you are on a local street, you could be in a place, but you won't be able to get around very much, right? There's this magic place in the middle, however, called the collector, where you can, in a sense, have your cake and eat it too. You can both be in a place and get through a place at the same time. What we have found, or what we recognize today, is that these are really good investments in our system. When we are building high-quality roads that connect places across distance, we can move goods, we can move people, and we can grow both of those economies in really successful ways at reasonable prices. When we build a great street, when we go out and we slow traffic down and we make an investment in a place where people can walk, where they can get around, where we've got the land use regulations in place to allow private sector investment to follow, what we see is that we can get a really high return on that investment. But it's this area in the middle where we try to both be a place and drive through a place at the same time that we wind up spending enormous sums of money and getting very little in return. You see the same kind of effect from a safety standpoint. Again, high speeds are not the problem. If everybody's driving at high speeds, it's a very safe environment. It's when you start to introduce complexity into a road system that you start to get crashes, that you start to get fatalities, that things start to go bad. If we can simplify down, we can make these investments and have them be very safe. It's the same thing on local streets. There was a study a few years back that said the state of Massachusetts is the most dangerous place to drive. It was put out by Prudential, or one of the Allstate, one of the big auto insurance places. And it was an absolutely stupid study. They finally acknowledged that it was stupid. What the study said is that this is where we get the most claims. But the most dangerous place to drive is actually Wyoming. Wyoming has the most deaths per capita, the most deaths per mile traveled. In Massachusetts, there's a whole lot of crashes, but they're fender benders, right? They're dented doors, they're low stakes. People aren't dying from them. If you've ever been to Massachusetts and driven around on a local street, they're very tight, they're very old. You can't really get up to very high speeds. And so, yes, a lot of people bump into each other, but not a lot of people dying. These places tend to be very safe. Go out to Wyoming, and it's the exact opposite. All this has been built post-World War II, very wide, very aggressive, and when two people hit each other, there's traumatic injuries almost always. This area right in the middle personifies that. The idea that we can have high speeds and complexity at the same time is how you get tragedy, how you get trauma. We have taken this chart here and turned it on its side and said, asked a different question. Let me see if I can get it. There we go. We've asked the question, at what speed do our transportation investments create the most value? And what we recognize is that when we design for very, very low speeds, really well-designed streets, we create a lot of private sector investment and we get a high return on that. When we design things for high-speed travel, we build great roads, we can connect two places over distance and again see a lot of private sector investment result and a high return on that investment. It's this middle area where we're neither in a place or traveling through a place, where speeds are somewhere between that 30 and 55 miles an hour, where we are building stuff that is very, very expensive, very, very dangerous, and provides minimal financial return back to the community. This is a part of the transportation network we call a STROAD. A STROAD is a street-road hybrid. We call this the futon of transportation. If you think of a futon as being an uncomfortable couch that makes into an uncomfortable bed, a STROAD tries to do two things at once, and it fails at both. It tries to be both a street and a road. It tries to both be a place and drive through a place. When you look at a STROAD, what you see is stuff like this, right? We've dedicated a whole bunch of lanes to moving traffic through, to getting turning traffic out of the way. But you have an environment like this that nobody gets to legally drive fast in, right? You're supposed to drive slow. There's actually a traffic signal that will make you go 0 miles an hour for extended periods of time. Despite the enormous investment in traffic flow, nothing gets to flow through here very fast. You also see a lot of investments about making this a more successful place, right? Decorative lights, wide sidewalks, they'll put up banners and benches and other things. But when we look at a place like this, what we see is that everybody operating in this environment recognizes that you arrive by motor vehicle. There's no economic ecosystem tied together here. And so every place has parking lots and drive-throughs. The development gets very spread out. And the amount of private investment per the amount of public investment, that ratio goes way, way down. And what we find is that cities lose massive amounts of money building places like this. We just passed, boy, time has flown by. A year and a half ago now, we passed the largest infrastructure spending bill that the United States has ever approved. Hundreds of billions of dollars poured into transportation. And it's astounding to me because the advocacy around this, I'm a big cynic of these things. The advocacy around it was, we're going to reconnect communities and build bike lanes and walkable neighborhoods. And you look, and like for every $1 of that stuff, there's like $1,000 spent on highway widening and all kinds of other stuff. Your state, as bizarre as it is, has been kind of particularly bad in terms of how you've chosen to spend some of this money. And I say, as bizarre as it is, I think we all recognize that Ohio has a lot of challenges. Minnesota has a lot of challenges. Our greatest challenge is not our inability to drive long distances at speed. But that is the one we are spending a predominant amount of our discretionary money on. Instead of this prolificacy of following a pattern of development that has run its course, we really need to have a national conversation about how we get rid of our stroads. The highest returning transportation investments we can make at the local level are turning stroads into great streets and turning stroads into well-performing roadways. We have to go one way or the other. I'm going to show you right now how easy it is to make a stroad into a street. I'm going to show you how easy it is to make a stroad into a road. I'm going to say that the actual physical doing it is very easy. What is hard about it is the cultural overlay, the cultural conversation we have about these things. That's the part that is difficult. If we have a stroad and we say we want to make this into a road, we want to attract a lot of private sector investment, we want to make this a great place to be, we want to focus on the place, slow traffic. That's the number one thing we do. We slow down the traffic. We prioritize being in the place over getting through the place. Okay? The experience of being in the place has to be a higher priority than the driving through of that place. We have to, if we want to attract investment, actually allow investment to happen. So when we build a great street, we should expect people to want to be there. We have to allow buildings to be occupied, expanded, neighborhoods to fill in, thicken up. And we need to recognize that great streets do not come out of a cookbook. There's no manual to do them. They're very hyper-local, hyper-personal kind of things that we design almost block by block by block with the people who are in that space. If we want to go from street to road, then it's the exact opposite, right? We limit access. We want to get rid of complexity. We don't want all those turning movements. We don't want all this stuff going on. We need to speed up traffic. We need to get things moving more quickly. We need to separate our automobiles from our other ways of getting around. This sometimes frustrates some of the bike advocates and the walk advocates. I'm going to tell you as an engineer, there is no way to design a bike lane on the side of a road where people are going over 20 miles an hour that will be safe. There's no way to do it. It is impossible. And so if we're going to have a road where the goal is to speed up traffic and get things moving, and we're going to have a bike lane, that bike lane has to be separated from the road. It cannot be in the same space. We have to resist the idea that we are going to develop along the road, that we're going to have a corridor of development with frontage roads and all the paraphernalia that come along with that. Those things come at incredibly high cost, and they actually make the road more complex. They actually cost us in capacity. And just simplify. Engineers are really great at doing this if we get out of their way. So let's go back to this problem here. The congestion problem, right? How do we deal with flooding today? It's interesting because Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, we kind of sit at this crossroads of when we were figuring this out. When you go further west, we don't have things like combined sewers. We do in Minnesota a little bit, but not as much, right? So just older parts of the city, they're ubiquitous in this part of the world. Combined sewer, I mean, where your sewage runs into your stormwater system, that kind of thing. That used to be very common. If you go east, it's very common. In west, it's not because of the time frame these things were built. Along with that, we have, in a sense, I won't say solve the flooding problem, but we've come up with a set of solutions that actually deal with the flooding problem fairly well. Different than we would have back when these cities in this part of the world were maturing. The way we used to address this problem, we would do things like build dikes, build dams, build spillways. Did that work? No, that did not work. It's amazing, you know, I remember back with Hurricane Katrina, which is going to be 20 years next year. Boy, it doesn't seem like that long ago. Hurricane Katrina was never supposed to wipe out parts of New Orleans that it did, right? We built dikes, we built things to protect it. But what happens when we build things like this? Do we maintain them over time? No. Do we stay out of those areas? No. Once we build it, then we're like, yay, we can develop here now in the danger zone underwater. We do all kinds of very human things. It's extremely costly to maintain this stuff, and we tend to not do it. We tend to deprioritize it. There's a big dam in California, and I've been following it because it was a big issue a few years ago, and it's kind of calmed down a little bit. But the Orono Dam, I think is the name of it. I can't remember. Here's what I know about this dam. There was a spillway. Dams have spillways because if the water level gets too high, you want the water to flow around it, not over top of it. Because if it goes over top of it, the dam does this magic thing. You've been underwater and been able to carry something very heavy? The astounding thing is that when the water starts to go over top, the dam will actually do this in ways that kind of in our mind of the physics seem impossible, but hydraulics are really, really powerful. The dam has a spillway, and the way you maintain a spillway is you just go out once a year and cut down everything that's growing there, right? Well, they didn't. And they didn't for years, and then they didn't for decades, and now the spillway has a bunch of trees growing in it. And the thing that is magical about trees is that they have roots, and roots go down into the ground and get into the dam and create all kinds of problems with your spillway. There's no good way to solve this problem once you allow it to happen. How did we allow that to happen? Because we just didn't care. We're very human. We solved the problem, we walked away, we dealt with a different problem, and we didn't do like basic, simple things, like hiring 2 interns to go out once a summer and, you know, pull the brush. I said we've solved this problem. How do we solve this problem? What we do today is we go out to this part of the system and we say to people, you don't get to run your water into the ditch. You don't get to fill in that wetland. You don't get to take a pipe and run it right into the stream. You have to maintain your water on your site and allow it to flow into the ground where it lands to, in a sense, kind of approximate what nature would have done, so that you don't contribute to the flood. I did this kind of permitting for years with cities. And someone comes in and you say, yeah, you can't fill in that wetland, or I'm sorry, you can't run that water right into the ditch. You got to retain that on site. You got to do something. They go, whoa, 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 I'm only adding like a small little bit. Like it's just a tiny bit of wetland. It's a tiny bit of water. Yeah, when everybody contributes a tiny bit, you get a flood. And so what we figured out is that instead of building multi-billion-dollar dams and floodways and spillways and dealing with like this ongoing problem, what we would do is just say everybody's got to take care of their part on site. And guess what? That works really well. You with me? All right. How do we solve this problem? I can tell you how we have tried to solve this problem, right? We've tried to solve this problem by building more lanes, adding more capacity, putting in interchanges and grade-separated overpasses. We've tried to, widen out turn lanes and approaches. Has any of that worked? No. I mean, maybe temporarily, the same way building a dike in New Orleans worked for a while, till it didn't. How do we solve this problem? Yeah. We actually have to build neighborhoods. We solve this problem by building corner stores, by building more homes in neighborhoods, by building in places where people can walk and bike and have different options than the automobile. Does that mean that people won't drive? No, people will still drive. But people will have the option to do other things. You see, congestion is one of these things that, if left to its own devices, will solve itself. How many of you have said, I'll take that trip, but not now, I'm going to wait till the road clears? Or I'm going to wait till a time of day when I can get there easily? Okay, we've all adjusted our own behavior based on our anticipation of traffic. That in itself changes traffic patterns. The one thing that we have not done is we have not made it legal for the market to respond to that by providing you other options. I can drive 10 miles to get milk. I can be in my car for 15 minutes to go get milk, 15 minutes there and back. I can wait until a time when it's only 10 minutes. Or guess what? There's a new place just up the street that I can walk to that's 2 blocks away that I can get milk. That third thing is the thing we've taken off the table. We need to put that back in the toolbox. And we need to allow the marketplace of people living in our communities to adapt to and solve some of these problems locally. We need to build good neighborhoods again. I want to talk a little bit here at the end about how we do that. And I've got 3 recommendations for you that are not going to feel like transportation recommendations, but they are very much related to transportation and how we build our transportation system. The first one is that we need to, everywhere, at all times, allow the next increment of development intensity by right. Let me break that down a little bit for you. When I say by right, I'm using some lawyerly speak that city officials will understand. What I'm trying to describe is a system where you can walk into City Hall at 9 a.m. with a completed permit application, and by noon walk out with a permit, and at 12:30 start building. That should be the standard by right. The next increment of development intensity, what I mean by that is, in every single neighborhood, you should be able to build something slightly more intense than what is there, by right. If you live in a neighborhood of single-family homes, there should be no regulatory friction for you to build a neighborhood of duplexes over time. If you live in a neighborhood of duplexes, there should really be no regulatory friction in that neighborhood evolving to be something more intense than that over time. If we want to build neighborhoods, we actually are talking about building economic ecosystems. I think your downtown here is very charming in its own kind of infant way. But recognize what it is. It is an infant. It is in a toddler phase. If we want the downtown to become successful, which we do, it needs to be more than a museum piece. It needs to be more than like a tourist stop or something we all can kind of enjoy on weekends. It needs to be something that is part of an overall economic ecosystem. It needs to be surrounded by homes. It needs to be surrounded by people. It needs to be surrounded by other businesses and other things going on in an environment that continually evolves, adapts, and changes. At Strong Towns, we have a saying, no neighborhood should experience radical change, but no neighborhood can be exempt from change. The operating system of post-war America, the marketing brochure was always stasis. We will go out and build this brand new suburb. We'll build this brand new subdivision. We'll build this shopping center. And it will be done, and it will be glorious. And it will never, ever change. And the way we sold this to people was to promise them that things would never change. If you study organic systems, which cities are organic systems, they're made up of us, right? They're complex, adaptive, organic systems. If you study them, the only way organic systems avoid change is to die. That's it. Anything that has living creatures in it is going to evolve and change over time. Once we take maturing off the table, once we say you're a single-family home neighborhood, you shall always be a single-family home neighborhood. You are a strip mall business court, you will always be a strip mall business court. Once we say that, what we have ensured, what we have decided is that that place will never improve. It will only be able to fall apart. It might take a decade, it might take a generation, it might take multiple generations, but the trajectory of it is clear. It will only go bad. We have to recognize that cities as organic systems need another option. They need to be able to improve. That improvement shouldn't radically change the neighborhood. It shouldn't make it so that it feels like a completely different, unlivable place. What it should be is a better version of itself. I used the term infant and toddler earlier. We should look at all of our neighborhoods, and I think particularly here in your community, we can look at all of our neighborhoods as somewhere in that toddler phase. And our goal is to get them to an adolescent phase or a teenage phase. The same way you raise a kid is what you're trying to do, is have them mature into like a better version of themselves over time. That should be our goal, right? Recognizing that we're going to someday hand it off to another generation, and their goal will be to mature it past the teenage phase to the young adult phase, right? Cities as organic systems are always changing. What we want is for that change to be a maturing and improving, as opposed to a clinging to stasis to avoid a terminal decline. In order to get this kind of maturing and evolution, we need to make a conscious effort to lower the bar of entry. We need to invite more people to come in and be part of building the city. We have done some things. I'm in the middle. Yeah, I'm going to say middle. I wish I could say late phases. I'm under contract to write a third book on housing. And yeah, thank you, but no. The manuscript was due March 15th. Let me tell you, the first book I wrote, I had it in 2 months early. The second book I wrote, I had it in about a week late. This one was due March 15th. I'm going to say halfway done. I feel just like eternal agony over this. It's driving me crazy. One of the things in my brain regarding this book is all the things that we have done to try to make homeownership more affordable, to try to keep people in homes and try to get people in homes, and how each one of those things has come with very good intentions, but have had the net result of making housing more unaffordable, more out of reach, harder to get into for more and more people. Let me give you an example. We have 30-year mortgages now. No big surprise here to anyone in the room. But if you went back 100 years ago, there was no such thing as a 30-year mortgage. It just didn't exist. If you were going to buy a house, you were going to have 50% down. You were going to finance it at a local bank. That financing was going to be a 5-year instrument with a balloon payment at the end. And it was going to be interest only. You were not going to have any principal. If you were going to pay down principal, you would do that upon refinancing. 100 years ago, housing was abundant, it was affordable, it was cheap, and it was really, really crappy. Today, housing is scarce. It is, even in struggling communities, very expensive. It is an elite product now, an increasingly elite product. And fewer people can get into it. but it's much higher quality, right? Oh yeah, trust me. I realize that we look and we're like, oh no, these are junk. No. Like literally 100 years ago, people lived in cardboard boxes that were homes. It is, we have, our worst housing today is much better than the average house 100 years ago. So we have taken all these steps, whether it's zoning codes or building codes or permitting processes or regulations and all this, to raise the standard. But we have simultaneously brought along with it a raising the bar of entry. And we've taken a whole segment of our community and said, you don't get to fully participate in the building of this place because you can't qualify for a 30-year mortgage, for example. We need to systematically lower the bar of entry. Let me give you 2 examples of what I mean. This is something in my community that we call a tiny house. My ancestors would have called this a house. For some reason, we have put the adjective tiny on the front of this and adopted all these regulations and processes in order to build what is essentially a starter home, right? We can go around the world for thousands of years and see places where people built starter homes. What was a starter home? It was just a small house, right? And we know how this works. You didn't have much money, so you would build a small home. When you saved up a little bit more, you'd put an addition on. Eventually, you maybe had a kid, you put on a second story. The neighbor would come over and help. You'd go over and help them. This is kind of the backbone of civilization. We see this everywhere we see cities. We can walk around your neighborhood here and see the evolution of different homes. If you go look, you'll see the old house in there with a bunch of different additions on it. This is a very common way of building. We have made it illegal, or we made it very difficult. If you want to build a tiny house in my community, you have to meet, you have to meet, first of all the requirements of a house. You have to meet subpart A through M of the tiny house code. You have to go beg permission from your neighbors. You have to genuflect in front of the planning board. You have to demonstrate that you won't be creating chaos and mayhem by building what is basically a starter home. We should not have this level of friction for doing something that humans have done for thousands and thousands of years. Here's another example. This one's from Muskegon, Michigan. You can drive up and see this if you want to on a weekend. In Muskegon, Michigan, you have a city that underwent rapid deindustrialization, had a lot of vacancies in their core downtown that they struggled to fill. The standard way to fill vacancies in a downtown is to try to subsidize businesses to move in and to occupy them. They were very smart in Muskegon, and they recognized that they were going to lose money on every one of those transactions. That wasn't going to work. They also recognized that they had a very entrepreneurial group of people in their city, but that the bar of entry to get into the downtown was too high. If you wanted to get into the downtown, you were going to have to fix up the building. You were going to have to install commercial sprinkler systems and ADA compliant bathrooms and on and on and on. These things are all good, but they were a bar that people could not cross, especially entrepreneurs. And let's be real about what an entrepreneur is. An entrepreneur is a crazy person who doesn't know they can fail, right? It's someone with an idea that they believe in so passionately that they don't think about any of the downside risk. That is different than an investor. An investor is someone with extra capital that is looking for a place to invest. That's not an entrepreneur. That's an investor. We need investors too. Entrepreneurs are crazy people. What Muskegon did is they said, we're going to make a place for crazy people. So they went out, they bought a bunch of storage sheds, they painted them up funky colors, they had a gap in their streetscape, they filled in that gap with these storage sheds, and they rent them out really, really cheap to startup entrepreneurs. No long-term commitment, no, big lease, no big things you have to do. You just come in here, open up, try out your idea. There's all kinds of people walking by. See what you can do. And what this has allowed is crazy people to come in an environment where they can try, fail, figure it out. develop a successful business. And if you go to Muskegon today, go to the core downtown, which is just 2 blocks away from here, and you'll find it full of businesses, a lot of which got their start proof of concept here and were able to, in a sense, graduate to their core downtown. This is how we lower the bar of entry and invite more and more people in to build our community with us. Last concept. We have, for a very long period of time, had a top-down capital investment strategy. Our cities are very honed and refined and tuned to tap into federal dollars, state dollars, developers coming into our community to invest in infrastructure, invest in systems, invest in things that are going to create growth locally. We have built more infrastructure than we have the wealth to sustain. Maumee has more roads than you have capital to fix. You have more pipes than you will ever be able to tax ratepayers to repair. This is a very hard thing to come to grips with, because what it means functionally is that we will have fewer roads, fewer pipes, fewer infrastructure systems in the future than we have today. We are close enough to Detroit where you can see what that looks like when it happens. Detroit is one of these fascinating places, and when I travel around the country, I find that everybody has their own story of what has gone on in Detroit. I feel like the Detroit story is very easy. Detroit was the very first city to pioneer what would become the post-war American development pattern. They did it 2 or 3 decades ahead of everybody else. They were the auto city, right? They're the motor city. They were the ones who were the first ones to run the highways through the neighborhoods, to have commuters live on the edge and drive in. They're the first ones to tear down buildings at scale, to make them into parking lots. The first one to create like a constellation of businesses out on the edge that people would drive to. They were the first people to take a successful city, spread it out over a huge area with enormous costs associated with it. And they're the first city to reach the logical conclusion of that development pattern, which is things fall apart and fail, and then you declare bankruptcy. Detroit was a city we all copied after World War II. When we were trying to figure out what should we do with this innovation, the automobile, and all these troops returning home, and we want to keep the economy going, stay out of going back into the Great Depression. What do? We grow, grow, grow. What does that model look like? It looks like Detroit, one of our, at the time, most successful cities. This model needs to end. And the question that we need to ask is not where do we build a new road? Where do we build a new pipe? Where do we build new infrastructure systems? But how do we make better use of the stuff we've already built? How do we take that street we've already built and get better return on it? How do we take that pipe we have in the ground and get more utilization out of it? How do we increase our overall level of productivity as a community? And that is a very different investment strategy. But it's one that we can do. It's one that we can do very successfully. And it's one we can do with the capital we have on hand. We just have to ask a different series of questions, right? We have to ask a different series of questions that center around where is this city not working for the people who are here today. At Strong Towns, we have created a 4-step process to making the lowest risk, highest returning public investments that we can make. I'm going to walk you through this process right now. It's actually very easy. Step number 1, go out and humbly observe where people in the community struggle. Where are people having a difficult time using the city as it has been built? I'm going to stress here humility. The idea is to kind of free your mind of all the things that you think are going on or you think you're going to encounter, and actually go out and try to understand in the most genuine way where the people who live in our neighborhoods have a difficult time. Try to walk with them. Try to talk with them. Try to understand from them where their day-to-day experience of living in this place is hard. Step number 2 then, ask ourselves the question, what is the next smallest thing we can do right now to address that struggle? We have to resist the idea that there's a federal grant we can get that will fix this, or there's a project in our capital improvements plan 5 years from now that we want to do that will help this. We have to ask ourselves in a very disciplined way, what is the thing we can do right now? Not to solve this forever, not to make this never a problem again, but to just make this a little bit better. And when we ask ourselves that question, it has to be the next smallest thing. What's the thing we can do with straw bales and duct tape and paint and cones that will make this a little bit better? Step number 3 then, go do that thing. Just do it right now. Don't hire a consultant, don't form a committee, don't study it for 6 months. It's just a tiny little thing, like go out and do it. And step 4 then, repeat this process. Repeat it over and over and over and over. I talked earlier about cities maturing, right? About neighborhoods going from infants to adolescents, from adolescence to teenage, from teenage to young adult. There's a maturing process. We need to stop talking about solving problems, because in a city, no problem is ever solved. What we're talking about is more like gardening, more like nurturing. How do we take this place and allow it to improve, allow it to better serve the people who are here? How do we learn then from what happens after that and have that drive the next step of what we do and the next step of what we do? The thing about this process is, let's say we go out and we humbly observe where people struggle and we come up with a small little thing we're going to do. It'll take a couple hours to go out and set out some cones and do some things, but we think that'll make things a little bit better. And we go out and we do those things, and then we observe again, and guess what? Nothing really is any better. Okay, well, what are we out? A little bit of time, a little bit of effort, not much money, but we learned something, right? Let's go try something else again, and try something else again, and try something else again. It's that humble, iterative approach, very much like a gardener, of nurturing a neighborhood up to the next step of intensity. Combined with this idea that every neighborhood should be able to grow and adapt and change, that we lower the bar of entry and invite more people in. And what you can start to understand, or what you can start to realize, when you start to experience, is neighborhoods that get incrementally better over time. The essence of the Strong Towns approach is that we can spend a lot less and we can get a lot more out of all that spending. And at the end of the day, create places not only where people want to live and want to be part of, but where they can experience a much higher quality of life, a much more meaningful life, a much more prosperous life, a life with a lot more opportunity for them to thrive, to contribute, to be part of a community that is successful. That's ultimately the Strong Towns vision. And it's why we can talk transportation, we can talk safe streets, and it's a very important part of the conversation, but we also have to talk about how we build great neighborhoods, how we scale them, and how we humble ourselves to do this deep service to the people who are our friends, are our neighbors, are the people that we are relying on to do their little part to make our communities much, much better places. I'm going to end with this, because I want you to know that you're not alone. When engineers design streets, there's a process that they go through. The first thing they will do is they will say, what is the speed that I'm designing for? They will then say, what is the volume of traffic that we expect to have in this area? They will then take that speed and that volume, and they'll go to the design manual, and they say, what does the design manual say is a safe way to build this street? And then how much does that cost? It's these 4 steps: speed, volume, safety, cost, that are the parameters that engineers use and apply to street design. And they come in that order, right? We always start with speed. We then ask, what's the volume of traffic? How do we do those 2 things in a safe way? And what is the cost? And so these 4 parameters become, in a sense, a priority matrix. Start here, then go here, then go here, then go here. This is the street design process. This is my street. This is where I live. This is 4th Street North in Brainerd, Minnesota. My house is up from that little sidewalk right there. It's right over there. You can come visit me someday if you're ever in Brainerd. You're welcome. I want you to think about your street. Think about the place where you live. Or if you don't like the place where you live, think about the place you would like to live. And I want to put you in charge of the design process. I want you to lay out your priorities for how you would build your street. All right? So this is the public participation portion of this presentation. And we're going to end with this. So please, I'm going to ask you which of these is your highest priority. And I want you to, at the same time, shout out what would be yours, right? So you're designing your street. Would you sit down and first say, what is the design speed that I want to be able to achieve here? Do I want to make sure that vehicles can travel at a certain speed? Would it be look at the volume of traffic and say, I need to accommodate this projected volume of traffic? Would it be safety? Would you start with safety and say, my highest priority is that the street is safe? Or would it be cost? I want to make sure that the investment we make is cost effective. So everybody now, is your priority speed, volume, safety, or cost? You see a little bit of difference, but for the most part, people said what? Safety. All right. You've got safety. We want to make sure this thing is safe. If you're setting a second priority, do you want to make sure that you can move a certain volume of vehicles through? I'm sorry, you got me thinking volume because you yelled volume really loud. Do we want to make sure that, yeah, you're overthinking this. Do we want to make sure that vehicles can travel at a certain speed, right? We can attain a speed. Do we want to make sure that we can accommodate a volume of traffic? Or do we want to make sure that our investment is cost effective? What would be the highest priority for you? Would it be speed, volume, or cost? All right. If you have to choose between speed and volume, we can attain a higher speed, but it'll be fewer cars. Or we can fit more cars through, but they're going to have to slow down. Would you say speed is a higher priority or volume is a higher priority? I'm unable to change these, by the way. So I've done this enough, though, where I know what people are generally going to say, so I feel pretty confident. Do you see what we've done here? Do you see what you have done here? Here's the thing. At some point in the next week, in the next month, in the next year, in the next decade, you're going to be at a public meeting or in a public discussion or in some type of dialogue or conversation with people in the community. And you're going to talk about slowing down traffic to improve safety, to invite private investment, to make the neighborhood a better place, a more successful place. And you are going to talk about slowing down traffic. And there's going to be an outcry from somewhere, right? And your natural reaction is going to be, I'm crazy. I'm on the forefront here. I'm on the cutting edge. I'm alone. Nobody agrees with me. I want you to know, everybody agrees with you. Everybody agrees with you. I've done this at conferences with hundreds of engineers in the room. And guess what they say? They say that. Everybody knows that the human thing to do is to design places that are safe. Everybody knows that the prudent thing to do is to make investments that are cost effective. And we all know that that is way more important than the amount of vehicles that we move at speed. You are not alone. And so while you might hear a little bit of pushback, you might hear a little bit of outrage, there might be some reactionary forces that say, oh, we can't do that, it will slow down traffic, oh, it will be horrible. I want you to be confident knowing that you are in not just the majority voice, but the vast overwhelming majority voice in these conversations. There's this idea called complete streets. And if you have not heard of it, it is a concept that has taken hold within engineering professions now. It was advocated for a number of years, and engineers have kind of adopted this as a great approach. The idea of a complete street is that we should accommodate everybody in the transportation system as we build it. And so if you're designing a street, you will have places for automobiles to drive, yes. You will also have places for automobiles to park, but you also have a place for transit, you have a place for people biking, you have a place for people walking. It's a complete street. It's got something for everybody. I think of this sometimes as like Oprah doing a street, right? Like you get a lane, and you get a lane, and you get a lane, and everybody gets a lane. This is a very American approach, right? We overcome conflict by giving everybody something. Engineers, when this concept first was coming to the fore, pushed back on it. But very quickly, I watched the engineering profession evolve and adapt and embrace complete streets. I think that happened for two reasons. Reason number one, there's often more money to build complete streets. A lot of engineering contracts are based on a % of construction costs. If you're building more stuff, it's a higher project cost. There's more compensation, that kind of thing. Money has a way of affecting people's values, right? And I think engineering profession is no different than any other subset of humans. If you put more money in complete streets, eventually people will really like to build complete streets. I think the other thing, though, and this is the more important one, the complete streets concept did not challenge any of the embedded design priorities of the engineering profession. The complete streets, you are still able to focus on speed, then volume, then safety, then cost. It does not require any compromise of values or priorities. When we look at the complete streets concept, what we see is that complete streets accommodate pedestrians within an auto-dominated environment. This is a great step over where we're at now, but it's far short of what a strong town is. A strong town, a great street, is going to accommodate automobiles in an environment dominated by people. It's people who build wealth. It's people who buy things. It's people who make places successful. It's people who start businesses, who write poetry, who fall in love, who make great music. It's people who do all the things that make a city a wonderful place. When we design for automobiles, we push to the side the human element. If we go to the greatest cities, the greatest places that we have built in North America, the places we all like to shop in and visit as tourists and experience, they are all places built around humans. And the greatest ones are not built to be tourist places. They're built to be places that people live in. People pay extreme amounts of money today to live in the handful of places in North America that are built around people. The way this city was originally built, the way every city that was built prior to the Great Depression was built. You have the bones to do that here. You have the capacity to do that here. You will find that approach to cost you far less and be a much more successful financial investment to pursue. And you have, and I'm looking out at a room that has a lot of young people in it, you have a group of people here who are ready to roll up their sleeves and do their part to make it happen. Not every place can say that. We have the capacity to spend a lot less and to build a lot better places. We have a capacity here to just choose a different approach. And the only thing that is going to require is for us here in this room to not only make that choice, but to go out and talk to others about it, to be advocates for it, to when the conversation comes up at the coffee shop and the soccer field and the PTA meeting and the city hall, to be the ones who say, we're going to do this differently this time. If we do that, we have a much higher quality of life at a much lower cost with a much greater return, and the capacity to live a very prosperous place. That's the essence of a Strong Towns approach. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me here today and coming out and being part of this. I know we have a mic for some questions. If you have some questions, do you want people to come up here? Oh, you're going to go out. Okay. A couple things while we're doing that. My team gets really mad at me if I don't do a couple things at the end. First, our website, strongtowns.org. Our organization started out as a blog. We still publish 2-3 articles every weekday. We have 3 different podcast streams you can plug into that have different formats. We do a lot of video work. We're on every social media platform. If you are interested in learning more and plugging in, please, all this is free. Go to strongtowns.org and get plugged in. I know there's some local conversation people here tonight. Can you raise your hand? Yes, awesome. There are groups here in your area that have formed that are trying to bring this message forward. If you are interested in being part of that local movement, these are people to chat with afterwards and get plugged into. You can also go to strongtowns.org/local and get connected to them that way. And then third, if you're very interested in this and this means something to you, the primary thing that you can do for me, for us, for our organization, is to tell someone about it. Share this message with someone else. It's great that you're here and it's great that you're listening, but we have a lot of work to do. If you go home and roll up your sleeves and say, I want to make this city better, I'm ready to go to work, I'm ready to do it, the first thing you do is reach out to someone and talk to them about it and get them into the conversation. So please, go ahead. I'd be happy to talk and answer questions and talk about whatever you all want to chat about.
Hey, great. Chuck, I'm Chuck as well. I enjoyed your conversation.
Thank you.
As far as like the walking, biking to neighborhood conveniences, so
Yeah.
and I'm thinking, growing up here in Maumee, there used to be a Sterling's little store right up here.
Mm-hmm.
It's now a bait shop. Ned's, I'm dating myself, Rich, over on Key Street. But so how do you get where these smaller, I'll call them mom and pop places, to compete that are walkable, rideable, to compete against the Krogers, the Myers, the
yes.
Amazons?
Yes.
How do they survive against the retail giants?
Yes, it's very hard. And I'm going to say, I don't think it's the low-hanging fruit, right? Like, I don't think right now the low-hanging fruit is a corner grocery store in most places. Because a corner grocery store, to be successful, has to have a certain amount of foot traffic, a certain amount of other traffic. There are people who are out starting them and certainly doing some heroic work, and we've seen some work out. But it's not often the low-hanging fruit. I think having a mindset that says we want these things to grow in our ecosystem. Let me give you an analogy. Well, let me tell you a story. Everybody's heard a little bit about rainforest being torn down. People go in and they rip out the rainforest and they farm it, and then sometimes they do slash and burn and they'll just move on once the ground is used up. There was a group that wanted to restore rainforest. And when I say that, restore rainforest, it sounds like a very simple project, right? And they kind of approached it as a simple project. We'll go out and plant some things and get some things growing and ta-da, rainforest. Did that work? No, it was a ridiculous failure. Because what happened is when you tore down the rainforest and denuded the landscape, it's okay. What was failed to recognize is that the rainforest was something that had been evolving over hundreds of years, thousands of years to get to that spot. When they replanted, what they got was just weeds. They got like the invasive species. When you look at our economic ecosystem today, what we've done is we've gone into places that were rainforests and we've denuded them. And then we put all kinds of like competitors around them, right? And created this like denuded landscape. And we see things like dollar stores going in and other kind of invasive species. I think we have to be humble about that's what a dollar store is. It's a parasitic invasive species, right? Like it is, well, it's, I'm sorry, I should be more gentle when I describe these things in this way. I think we have to have humility when we go back into these ecosystems and say, it's not enough to just plant like a tree and then we'll get a rainforest again. We actually have to prune the weeds back, let natural things start to grow, recognize that it's gonna look ugly for a while, it's gonna take some time and effort, but like the ingredients are there. I think we have to resist the idea that we can jump stages, right? Like a rainforest, you can't go out and like plant a big tree and go, ta-da, rainforest, right? Like a rainforest is big trees, but it's also many different types of flora and fauna working together in this ecosystem. But we know in a neighborhood what these ingredients are, right? It's people, it's places, and it's the capacity for them to evolve and adapt. And I think if we start with that building structure, that street form, and bring humans in, the messiness will work itself out and we'll get to where we need to be. I think we should not start with, we need grocery store, we need hardware store, we need this, because I feel like we'll be making the same mistakes that the people who went to the denuded landscape and we're likely to just get weeds. Does that make sense? Okay.
Hello, Gabe Barrow. I met you earlier, Chuck.
Yes, Gabe, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, great presentation. We in Maumee, I say we because I'm a city council here, we hired Dr. Birch, and he was a visionary of everything you're talking about, introduced city council and an awful lot of residents to your books.
I thank you for that.
Covering engineer and strong towns. And we've been following that model, I'd say, pretty closely as best we could. We revamped a half a mile of the road, or the walkway down by the towpath, refurbished it, got invasive species out of there, really flourished it. We were having a tree planting program with the schools. Everybody in Maumee city schools were trying to get to plant a tree, care for a tree, nurture a tree, density. We have 3 or 4 times more people now using Uptown, where it's quiet and safe, and you get a little bit of that walk today as you walk the administration building back to here. So we can see the progress in it.
Definitely.
Not everybody's on board, of course, with it, but
Yeah.
a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really grateful when I go to places and people have read the books and are plugged in and are part of the conversation. So thank you very much. It means a lot. Please.
Hi, I'm Steph. I'm with the Division of Forestry. Thanks for talking about forests.
Oh, yes.
But anyway.
So we're on the same page, right?
Yes, yeah, for sure.
You can't just plant trees.
Right. One of the challenges that I see communities face a lot is that they get these downtown renovations paid for by ODOT, who has their own idea of what they're going to pay for, which isn't in the best interest of the community, but these communities don't feel like they have any power to say what they can have done to their town.
Right.
And my thing is always like, this is your town. You need to do what's right for you and not let some outside funding dictate you. But do you have any other advice that those of us who are working closely with these communities to do these things can do to help get them to stand up to being, because they're afraid they're going to lose all the funding for all the upgrades.
You're right. Thank you for describing that. We see this all the time. Departments of Transportation come with the money, and so their standards rule. Developers come in with the money, and so what they want tends to govern. I'm gonna say something that you might not like, but bear with me. I try to tell people to pick and choose your battles, and to recognize often that these are not the low-hanging fruit fights that you want to have today. I've studied a lot of like military history and revolutionary history, and you see a lot of like failed revolutions where people stand up and you know, try to fight things where they just don't have the support and the backing, and ultimately their cause ends up in the waste bin. I see a lot of that happening in cities because the things that galvanize people is the highways doing this, or the Department of Transportation doing this, or there's this big project over here, and they can rally a bunch of people and be mad about it, but ultimately in a futile effort. I'm not saying that's not worth your time. But what I am saying is that, to me, if I'll talk about my own experience in Brainerd a little bit. The work that I do with my neighbors is very local, very neighborhood driven. And the goal of that is to make things better, yes, but it's also to build up our chops for working together, build up our capacity for working together. When we do small things well together, we can do big things well together. And I get frustrated with the DOTs when they come in, but the reason they're able to do that is because the vast majority of the city has no problem with what they're doing. The vast majority of the community is not willing to show up and stop it. I will tell you that I can go to other places where there's high levels of social capital, where people have the experience of working together on small things. And when the big things happen, they show up and it affects the DOT. The places that are able to exert their will the most successfully tend to be of one of two varieties. One, they're either very affluent, so they're very connected, and that kind of influence is a different type of influence. But if you go to affluent neighborhoods, what you're likely to see is that they have narrow streets, they have well-designed streets. You go to the poor neighborhoods, they have wide streets with no sidewalks, right? That is a big part of the affluence feedback loop. So we can either be very affluent and use our political and other connections to get what we want, or we can have high internal social capital. We can be connected to each other. We can have methods of working together. Doesn't mean we all agree on everything, but we have high internal social cohesion. And then when things start happening to our community that we are going to reject, we actually have internally the capacity to stand up and say no. So the DOT is a huge problem. The outside development money, to me, is a bigger problem. Because right now, capital, I mean, even though interest rates have gone up, capital is like really, really cheap, has been for a long time, and anybody with any dumb idea can come to a city and get a bunch of money to do it. And we fawn all over them because we want growth, right? If you really are concerned about the DOT, if you're really concerned about the form that outside capital takes when it reaches your city, work on those local bonds. Start doing the small project on the street. Start doing the small project in the park. Start the cleanup effort over here. Start doing the things to build your internal chops. This is what our local conversations are all about, right? Is like building up that capacity to be able to act in a large way when we're called upon. I get calls all the time from places. Can you come help me stop the highway through the middle of town? Can you come, we're about to pass this really bad ordinance or this really bad comp plan. And I'm not suggesting that's what you're asking me. But my response is always like, it's too late at that point. We need to get way out in front of that stuff by building our internal capacity. Please.
Hello,
Hi.
my name is Megan McClellan. I'm from Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Hi,
Right
Megan.
here for
Wow,
you.
Fort Wayne.
There's actually 3 of us here.
No, seriously.
Yeah.
Wow, welcome.
Thank you.
How far of a drive was that?
It's about an hour and a half.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for
I drove
having us
through
in your
Fort
lovely
Wayne
city.
when I went to, I'm embarrassed now. What was our strongest town winner last year? That was over by you.
South Bend.
No. Anyway, I should remember this because I was there. Go ahead, please.
All right, so I really appreciate all that Strong Towns does. I do follow you and read your book and things. But I'm a little curious about the slide that was saying, humbly observe, and then you should come in and make a change. Because this ties in directly to what you were talking about with the previous question. I feel that a lot of us in the room might see a problem in a different neighborhood
Yeah,
and say, that needs to change.
yeah,
But then we're coming into that neighborhood to make that change.
right.
And if you try then, and that doesn't seem appropriate, but on the other hand, oftentimes maybe those lower income neighborhoods that don't have that financial capital and maybe don't have the time and resources or the knowledge of how to get that social capital to make those changes.
Yeah.
And so as much as that change needs to happen, and a lot of people can see that, you don't want to do it to a neighborhood that is not yours. So I guess maybe what would be your sort of recommendations for, like you say, make a small change,
Jasper, thank
but sometimes it can take a very long time to build up that social capital to get that change made. So I don't know, just sort of your thoughts on
No, I love it. It's
better
a great
incorporation
question.
of the community.
So let me give you a book right off the bat, and then let me kind of delve into that a little bit. There's a book called The Tactical Urbanism, and so you're nodding. You've heard of this. Michael Iden, Anthony Garcia. It's a great book. What I'm trying to describe is something where we use a lot of the tools that would be in that book. And it isn't so much doing things to people as it's doing things with people. Right now, with our very top-down funded capital improvements project, what we tend to do is we tend to internally in the bureaucracy develop a project, bring it out and have engagement, which is often like engagement theater, right? Like put up your strengths and weaknesses and here's a sticker to put on things and which one of these bad options do you like most? It's public engagement theater, and I find it, again, to be rather insulting. It starts from the idea of here's what we internally think should be done to you, and then our job becomes selling it to you. That is the kind of engineering work that I was involved in for a number of years. We would go interview for a job in a place, and they would say, how good are you at selling the project to the public? How good are you at the public engagement process? Which didn't mean how well are you at listening, how well are you at the dog and pony show to get our project approved. What I'm trying to describe is something where we iterate with the people who are there. So instead of putting the burden on them to show up to our meeting and tell us what you want, go vote in the next election, go to this community meeting over here, fill out this survey. Instead of putting that burden on them, we go out to them as they're experiencing the community and try to, the best we can, humbly discern where that is hard. We may get it wrong. But the reality is we go out and do something temporary to try to see, like, did we get it right here? Let me give you just a concrete example. It's very hard to cross this street. The crossing is very wide. When we're here, we see people struggling with this. They'll get halfway across and they'll start to run across to get over soon. It's difficult crossing. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go out and take cones and put a temporary bump out in, maybe some straw bales, and shorten up that crossing. And then we're going to go out and observe how people react in that space. Let's say we do that, and people don't react any differently. No more people are using that. They get out there and they still run across, they still like express that, no, this doesn't feel safe. That was the wrong answer for that spot. Like something is missing. We didn't do something right. But I'm getting the feedback from them in real time, right? Like I'm not asking them to abstractly tell me what they think. I'm watching it, almost like product testing. But the reality is that we can, by doing this product testing along with people, not only respect them and their time schedules, but then react in real time to where they are struggling. We call this at Strong Towns co-creation. And it's co-creation instead of the formal public hearing process and project development process. It's messier. You won't always get it right. That's the humility part of it. When I get it wrong, I'm going to not hang on to what I thought was right. I'm going to back off and try something else. I may get it right and it may work for 18 months, but then conditions in the neighborhood change because the neighborhood's always evolving, and that's no longer the right thing. So then we're going to change it again and redo it. But we should think of it as a co-creation, which is a very bottom-up delivery mechanism for building a place. It says you participate in this process by just living your life, as opposed to participating on my terms. I am, as the local government, as a humble servant, going to participate in this co-creation process on your terms. Does that make sense? So you're in a sense taking the power and inverting it and making it very bottom-up driven and responsive, as opposed to top-down driven, almost sales. I'm not suggesting that it will be perfect 100% of the time, but it's oriented in a way that I think will get us closer to the respectful dialogue you're seeking. It's okay if I sit here, right? Because I can see you really well. Please.
So I have the inverse of that question.
Okay.
So you talk about being a steward for strong towns, advocating for these safer environments. I have watched this play out in one version or another at a couple different communities, because Facebook is a hellscape and you can see a lot of stuff on there. And I see the same comment. It's not really an argument, it's a comment lobbed back at the ideas that are being proposed, as I have seen recently in Maumee. And it's something along the lines of, I just wish things would go back to the way they were.
Yeah.
Which we know is coded language for the people around me are changing, the culture around me is changing, and it's not like me and I don't like it.
Yeah.
So how do you appeal or reach the other side of that equation? How do you reach those people and make them see that being intentionally inclusive is not a bad thing?
Yeah.
You know, diversifying is not a bad thing. Everybody benefits from that. Because that is, you know, from everything you've said, a big part of this, removing those obstacles.
Yes.
So I'm just curious, when you're faced with something like that, what do you say to the person? Because it stumps me a lot.
It's a really good question, and it's a very hard one, and it's a very deeply personal one. And my answer may not make everybody happy. I feel like the way we overcome that, and I do think it's something we need to move beyond and overcome, I think the way we overcome it is by acknowledging the real parts of it. Because there is some truth in it. I look at my city and I wish it would go back to the way it was. In fact, I wish it would go back to the way it was for my parents. We've torn down the movie theaters. We used to have one like this in the downtown. We tore it down. We tore down the old Depot building. It's now a strip mall. We tore down the old Federal Bank. It's now a parking lot. We have let our parks fall apart while we build new ones out on the edge for people. We have kind of dedicated ourselves to moving cars very quickly through town. These things hurt. They hurt deeply. And last year, we tore down one of the elementary schools where I went to school in. It was built in 1932, the depths of the Great Depression. It was perfectly fine. I mean, it needed upgrades, sure, but like the building, you just seen the extent they had to go to knock down this like brick building. They knocked it down so we could have some more parking spaces at the high school for teenagers who also, have buses come to their house. This hurt. It hurt really bad. And I think a lot of the people in my community who say, I wanted to go back to what it was, can genuinely point to times when it was better. And if we don't acknowledge that or accept that, like that is true, yes, there is something there, I think we'll never be able to move past it. I also think that we have to step back and acknowledge that we do have this long history in this country of bringing new people in and finding ways to make that work despite great friction. In my hometown, I joke today, we have lots of diversity. We have Norwegians and Swedes and Finns. We have all the different Scandinavians, right? But the reality is if you went back, to the Great Depression, we had a Finnish neighborhood. And that was the low-class neighborhood in town. There was the Finnish sauna, which was like a brothel, basically. And that was, if you were part of the Finns were known as being a little less scrupulous and upstanding than the Swedes and the Norwegians who occupied the nicer neighborhoods in town. I don't think anybody in my community today could identify someone of Norwegian descent separate from someone of Finnish descent. Like, I don't think that is be possible for anyone to do. But 100 years ago, it was very real to them. My guess is that the people who were there at the time made statements about, these damn Finns and their, wayward ways coming into our community. What is going on? The whole place is going bad. I think the thing that was different then, I'm projecting a little bit, and I don't know this as a matter of fact. I'm projecting. But I look back at the history of my city, and this was a period of time where neighborhood level efforts added up to a greater whole. The Finnish neighborhood was by the railroad tracks. It was the least desirable neighborhood. But you could go to that neighborhood even today and see where there was a number of local grocery stores. There was at one point 13 grocery stores in this neighborhood. Today there's zero. There were 13 grocery stores in this neighborhood. They weren't grocery stores the way we think of them. It wasn't like a Publix or a Kroger's or whatever. It was like there was a butcher over here and someone who baked bread over here and someone who did, there were different things in the neighborhood. All of those places surrounded the Norwegian and the Swedish neighborhoods and the Finnish neighborhoods. They all surrounded a core downtown that was in its own way kind of a melting pot for the community. The efforts of people in each of these places made those places better over time in a way that people could witness. So the Finnish neighborhood, I've seen photos, was a nicer place than it is today by a large degree. The schools we built there were very nice. They were on par with the schools we built in other neighborhoods. They were very nice. I feel like it is harder today because very few of us can see our own personal efforts building a community that is in a trajectory better than it is today. A lot of what we're doing is hanging on to things that are declining. And they're declining structurally because we've kind of built that into our system. Remember when I talked about neighborhoods maturing and evolving, and if you take that away, the only thing left is decline? That means our mindset is, how do we cling to what we have and not allow it to erode further? I think we have to acknowledge that humans are flawed, and humans have natural ingrained biases that make us fearful of the other, a fear that is augmented when things are hard. The way we move beyond that fear and appeal to people's rational selves and their better selves is to create environments where things are improving over time, and we can point to our collective contributions to that as being part of this overall improvement. I know that's not, like, it would be nice if we were all angelic to each other. It would be nice if we were all beautiful people to each other. I would love that. I think the reality is that we are going to deal with flawed people in every place. And the traditional development pattern had a way of taking that and making it a game. I talk about in the book, a game where everybody's contribution led to a better whole. And we've created a game now where everybody's contribution actually detracts. The wealthy person who comes in and makes the investment over here actually detracts from the whole. The dollar store that comes in actually detracts from the whole. The poor person that moves in and occupies the rental house actually detracts from the whole. All of our actions in this system detract from the whole, because the whole is not meant to organically evolve and improve. It's meant to be static and hang on. I wish there was an easy answer. I really do. I feel like a lot of our dialogue around diversity and inclusion and how we build better places often brings conflict to a head in a way that sometimes helps us move beyond, but takes a huge amount of effort from people to move beyond. I would like to lower the bar of what it takes to move beyond. And I feel like I would start with acknowledging that there is hurt and that we do need a different system. And I think then we can start to, when we get things moving in the right direction, we can kind of bring everybody along with that. That's an idealistic view, but I feel like it's more realistic often than what we get now. I feel very dissatisfied with that answer, but it came from my heart.
No, I think it's genius, because it really is like,
I wouldn't go that far.
because when I hear things like that, my immediate reaction is anger. Right?
Yeah, no, we all.
Against my morals, sort of against how I feel.
Right.
I can see the long-range goal of this.
Yeah,
And frankly, not all of it, most of it doesn't connect to even hold up, you know?
right. Have you ever read Jonathan Haidt, The Righteous Mind? Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T. It's a book called The Righteous Mind. I buy it for everyone who comes to work for Strong Towns. It is core to what we talk about. Jonathan Haidt just talks about how humans are wired. And, you know, he'll say, me against my, you know, human history can be summed up in I think it's a Arab proverb, but I'm not sure about that. But the proverb goes, me against my brother and I against my cousin, my cousins and my brothers, me, my brothers and my cousins against the neighbor, me, my brothers, my cousins and my neighbors against the next town. You know, there's a certain, and the reason why that proverb is very strong is because there's a certain thing inside of us that is that way. I have my 2 daughters and my wife, and like that's who I cling to in a lot of ways. But when we draw the circle bigger, we are Brainerd, Minnesota. We are Maumee. I can see you as part of this circle that I've drawn. And our need when we're trying to do this kind of work is, as much as it is hard, is to suppress, I think, our anger, lead with empathy, and try to draw as big a circle as we can that we can include as many people in. And I feel like places that are capable of doing that make more progress. Please. Okay.
I mean, everything you said is great. 30 years ago, we moved here. We had a 12-year-old and we had a daughter in college.
Yeah.
And this was pre-internet, so you couldn't go around and do all this house shopping. You had to rely on a realtor.
Yeah.
We were moving from the East Coast, so we had a bucket of money that after the first day of looking at houses, we thought maybe we should buy our own house.
Yeah. Right. Price difference.
And
Yeah.
the tax laws hadn't changed, so you had to reinvest what you sold it for.
Right. Are you going to pay capital gains?
We ended up with a 180-year-old house over here, and I can walk here tonight. But what was fascinating is the only way I could discern.
Did
where
you
I-
say 180?
Yes, it's
Oh,
180
my
years
word.
old, and I like it a lot.
Oh, I'll bet.
But-
I have a house that's 110 years old, and it's just delightful.
Yeah. So one of the things I did is I worked at a university on the East Coast, so I researched the areas. And I looked at schools, which you could find that information in books. And there was three cities I was looking at. And what it came down to is I did not want to live in a neighborhood that all the houses looked the same, because I'd worried about getting lost when I came home from work.
Right.
And the only thing we could say, which kind of goes along with Allison's comment, is the only way we can discern even what kind of community it was in Maumee, the houses, especially in the uptown area, are mixed economic houses.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, there's rentals, there are small houses, there are large houses, and that was why we decided to choose on Maumee. My son came to school with us, moved away for a while, and is back. My daughter was living on the East Coast, and she came back here 10 years ago. She's now a shop owner in the uptown area. But it has a lot of things that are happening now that I think are really exciting. And I'm just hoping I can live a whole lot longer so that I can see some of this. But I just really appreciate what's happening right now.
The neighborhood around this building is quite beautiful. And I think, whenever I go east from Minnesota, I'm always excited because if you think of the Great Depression as this divergence point, and just like, where was the country then? There was nothing in Arizona, right? It was like a desert in the middle of nowhere. We started to build dams and started to build, and then we got Phoenix and we got all this stuff. We got Las Vegas. We built all this stuff in the desert. All that stuff is post-World War II. And most of it is post-1970, post-1980. And so it has a very different look and feel to it. But when you go further east and further north, you get into places where you have 180-year-old homes and neighborhoods that are hundreds of years old. And those actually are great, have great bones, have great, old structures, and kind of, they are, in the gardens that we're trying to cultivate in cities, they're the most fertile ground because they were designed to be traditional neighborhoods. The neighborhood around this building is gorgeous, it's beautiful. The worst part of this neighborhood is what we've done with the transportation system, right? Like the damage we've done, and we can slowly undo that. And you've started to undo that to a degree. I feel like we're getting close to time. I am here and would like to talk to all of you. I know they want me to sign some books. I'm happy to do that. I'm from Minnesota, and I always feel like there's a time for everything. And people, when you stay too late, they're like, oh, I really need to go, but it's rude to get up and walk out. So I always feel like we got to cut this off so that people who have that condition can walk out without feeling rude. But I will go in the back and sign books and talk to people for as long as you guys all want to. Before we quit, can we have our two local conversation people just stand up real quick? Where are you from?
From Brunswick. It's near
Brunswick.
Cleveland.
Near Cleveland. Hudson, near Cleveland. And you are?
Toledo, we just had our first meeting yesterday.
You did. Eric, right? Yep. Jake, what is it? Jacob. I thought, okay, I have a note. Gotcha. You had your first meeting yesterday. And you're accepting people from this community who want to be part of your, at least getting started, right?
Absolutely. It would be great if Maumee had like
Yeah.
their own thing too, but yeah, more merrier.
All right. So you guys see who these guys are. So pick them out afterwards if you live close to them or near them, because we're in dialogue and communication with these guys all the time. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Awesome discussion, awesome presentation. We want to let everybody know that he's going to be presenting again tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. right here in the theater. So you're all welcome to join us again for another discussion tomorrow.
We'll do something a little bit different tomorrow.
A little bit different, and he'll be in the back signing books. So thank you.
I didn't know I was going to be in the theater tomorrow.